my screen, like that. Okay, so before we dive into it, and hopefully most of you have done your homework and actually saw the basic introduction to Premiere, what we're gonna end up with today, before you begin to follow along, we will try to see if we can manage to make a timeline which looks something like this, where we will have 4 video layers, and we will have used some animation, and we will make a concept video for an app called Twinder. And no, it's not a dating site for twins. Ramesh pointed that out to me yesterday. I don't know why he thought about that. But we just make a dating app not at all related to Tinder or anything. And we're going to do that by using some green screen footage of our truly wonderful Tessa. And we're going to show a short story where we dive through a scenario with her. And we're also then going to dive into stop motion and make that work. And we're also going to show some things about video layers and stuff like that. So on the web page, when you've downloaded the sample files, you should be able to load this entire timeline. When I have the files here, if you don't manage to follow along, it is many people who has to follow the same pacing here. So some of you might get lost along the way. Just yell and I'll do it again. But if you need to see what we made here, there is this file, and you can open that afterwards to sort of see, okay, how did he make that specific effect? When you open this one, you will get this one here. But we will start from scratch. So I'll go up here and I'll close all my projects. Nope. So we need to start a new project instead. So we just press the new project button, give it a name, doesn't matter what we call it. So we'll just call it video sketching demo, like that. And all the rest here doesn't matter for now. We'll change the specifics when we need to. And I know many of you don't have a setup like this. Some of you might have the timeline a different place. Some of you might have the effects panel a different place. If you later on need to configure your workspace, one of the videos on the webpage, the first video here called Setting Up Adobe Premiere to be used for sketching, that covers how to go up here on top, up here, and actually find the right elements. We need to be sure we have the tools, that we have the effects control, the media browser, program monitor, all of this stuff selected up here. And after you have selected all of this stuff, you can begin to configure where the stuff should be. This is just my configuration. But you can take, every time you have, you can see here I have my timeline. I can actually drag on the title of it, and I could drag to say my timeline should be over here, if that made sense, but it doesn't make any sense. So I'll drag it back down here instead. Over here. Wink. But again, the entirety of this is scalable, and that is one of the strengths of Premiere. You can configure it like to the liking of what you want, and then up here again in Window and under Workspaces, you can actually save this layout and call it something. For example, I have here a video sketching workspace that I do when I make video sketches. Okay? So, first things first, you should all somewhere have a folder or a place called project, and then the name of your project, where you have the ability to import some media. You can either do that by pressing down here, the new item, or by just double-clicking wherever there is a blank space. So if I double-click here, I will get the window of my file manager. So okay, I can either press here and select what I want, or I can just double-click in a blank position. And don't be scared off if this goes a bit fast. We're recording it all, so the entire video will also be put up on the webpage afterwards. Then we have to find the folder, the video sketching 2018 that I put up a download link for. And you can see it's filled with all the assets we're going to use. We can actually just select the entire folder and then press import on that one. So then we will tell Premiere to take everything inside and put it into our and when it asks you to input the entire project, it's because it knows there is a project file inside of there.
And the resources, they only have like both the sample files.
What? Am I the only one who has a page that looks like this on the web page?
No.
I think it's cache layered. Try to open it either in a different browser or delete the cache.
Oh, now it's here. Okay.
Okay, great.
Weird.
Okay.
Sorry.
You know, because the error that I got here was because that I have this file selected down here, and then it will actually try to import our entire project inside this one. So instead, what we need to do is you're going to select all of this and then deselect these project files. I'm sorry, I had forgot that it will import in that way. So you just select all the stuff and you import it. Import the entire project. Okay. Something like that. So hopefully when you've pressed OK, you should have a lot of files over here now. And you can see we have both some video files, like this one. Can make this a bit bigger. And we also have some still images. We have a background image here, for an example. And we also have some sound. Nice radar here. Okay. Have you imported the materials? Musky. Great. So, for my little video here, I've actually prepared a storyboard for myself. So, I'm going to direct the action here, just like if it was you guys trying to make a video. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to tell this little short story about an app called Twinder. And for that purpose, I have made a image here called Twinder title. And you can double click that and you can see introducing Twinder. And that is what we're going to do here. But before we are going to use this one, we want to make a timeline fit for video. So the first piece of video we're going to use is this one called green screen video. And you can see here we actually have Tessa acting very excited, and our narrative is that her boyfriend Klaus breaks up with her because he has a him now instead. Modern days, ladies and gentlemen. And then Tessa becomes in great disarray, and we want to add some effects to show her that actually there's a new app that she can use using Bluetooth eye beacons to help her find a better match than Klaus. And so I know that I'm going to use part of this video up until the point that she lifts her hand like this. So I'm going to use the scrubber here in my source monitor to say, okay, right around here it looks like she presses a button. So if we find that, we can use this feature of what's called the mark out. One of these small, you can make a mark in to say, okay, from where, and mark out to say till here. So when I press the mark out, you can see it becomes grayed out. It essentially just means now I'm only going to use this portion of the video in my timeline. And since the audio element of this video is just me directing the action, we can actually choose just to drag audio only. There is this film strip. So if I drag this down, you can see a plus icon come down on the timeline. And when I release this, I get a timeline with my Tessa video in it. So now we have it over here. You can see this is where the action and all the editing is beginning to take place. So I dragged the video down in the timeline and released. And now we have a timeline. And before that, I think we can begin to drag this around. And every time we drag this block, we are essentially editing. You guys probably already did that in the introduction. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to drag this Tinder face. Oh, not this one. The Twinder title. We're going to drag this also down in the timeline. We've made some room here now. So now we're going to drag the Twinder title down on the timeline. Let's just drag it down somewhere around here. And you can see right now the Twinder title is not as big as it is over here. That is because it is actually not as high a resolution as our video file. So what you can do whenever you encounter this, whenever you encounter a video file or an image file that you want to fill the entire screen but doesn't do it right now, you can right-click. Right-click on this short clip down here. And when we right-click, we get a lot of different options. But the one we can use a lot is this one just below the middle called Scale to Frame Size. So when I press that, it automatically resizes the entirety of the clip to fit my video. So now, instead of us having to do a lot of zooming, we now just have a title that just works. So now I can drag my video with Tessa and have it snap here again, and then have this nice little time for us to really know that this is Twinder. And this is where we could begin to add some of the first effects. And now, on my computer, the effects panel is down here. I know some of you, the effects panel will be over here. But the important thing is that you find the panel called Effects. The panel called Effects. If you haven't found it, it might be because it is deselected. So up in Windows, you can check, is it actually selected up here? Then it should be somewhere down here also. And here we have all sorts of effects. We will use a lot of video effects, a lot of video transitions. And what I usually start to do when I do this is to improve my workflow. And you guys should definitely do that too, because there are a few effects that we're going to use all the time. So instead of having to find the specific effects each time, you can see I've made a folder here called Sketching Effects that you don't have right now. And that's because you need to create it for yourself. So the first thing we're going to do is you're going to create a custom bin. Just press here on the folder down below. And when I press this one, I should get the option of having a new bin here. And I can just change the name, New Sketching. The first video that is on the website actually covers how to do all of this if you want to add more things. But now we're just going to show it along the way here, that every time we find a new effect that we're going to use for sketching, we're going to put it inside this new sketching folder. But for now, I want to use some of the fading effect, because right now this is too abrupt. We want sort of it to fade into action. So under video transitions here, we can find some of the dissolve effects. We can expand that folder too. And we can see there is cross dissolve, that's when the image blurs together. We can find the dip to black, dip to white. All these three effects are some of those that I like to use in video sketches. So I actually just want to drag them down into my folder. So I drag the dip to white, drag the dip to black, and drag the cross dissolve. So now instead of having to find this under a subfolder of a subfolder every time, I will have these three effects inside this new folder. So we will have a sketching folder here. And then I can begin to mix and match. Say, okay, how would it look if we made a cross dissolve? And then I can drag this effect, drag it down here, holding the mouse button, and drag it so it sort of highlights in between here my two clips. Then we get something like this. Nice little fade. Cool. So now we're started. Let's then get rid of all of this green screen and other footage on the image of Tessa. And to start doing that, we will need the effect called cropping. And every time we need to find a new effect, we can actually also just search for it. Right now we need to crop the image to be smaller. So instead of just, I could search for where is a crop effect, it's probably on the video effects. But I could also just up here in the search panel in the effects, search for crop. And I can see, okay, that was under video effects, transform, and crop. And again, I know I'm going to use this a lot. So before adding it to the video, we're going to drag it down into our new sketching folder. And now we will have the crop here too. So I dragged it again. Remember to deselect the search, because if you don't do, you will only see cropping effects. So now again, now I should have, besides my transitions here, I should have a crop effect. And then I drag that from here on top of our video with Tessa. You see the plus icon again. And nothing immediately happens, and that's because we need to dive into this panel, which probably resides as a tab besides the source monitor, called Effects Control. And you can see when we check that out, we see all the different aspects of the video we have selected in the timeline. So right now, I could control stuff like the scaling of this video. I could control its position, stuff like that. And I could control even its rotation. I wanted that. But I can also scroll down and see I have added this cropping effect. So now I can essentially ask Premiere to say, yeah, you know, I could just drag my cursor to the left or to the right, or input some values here. Or I can actually also drag over here when having selected the crop. So now I can begin to select what exactly do I want to cut out of this video. And we want to make sure that we don't see any of the pipes or the wall in the left side. And in the right side, we want to make sure that we only see when the green screen is there. So now we have, and you can see here, okay, actually we had a little bit more like that. So we can fine-tune this if we want to. But right now we only have the green screen left of our action. So it was some adjustment here. Next thing to do is to remove the green screen. And the way we're going to do that is using what's called keying effects. Green screen and blue screen are made through what's called keys. And there are multiple ways of doing this. And there are two main effects that we're going to use for creating these green screen effects. And I think I'm going to start up by, again, selecting search here and just write key, because I know that all these effects are called something about keying. We key out a color, basically, and make it transparent. And the two effects that I know we're going to use is the ones called Ultra Key. It should actually be said with a much more dramatic voice, Ultra Key. So we're going to use that, and we're going to drag this down here in our folder as a shortcut. But sometimes we're also going to use this one called the Color Key. It's a bit less aggressive, a bit more time-consuming, but also much more precise way of controlling the green screen. I'm also going to drag this down. So now I should have, again, down here in my sketching folder, my fading effects, but also a color key and a ultra key. Now, let's try to start with the color key. I can drag the color key on top of my video with Tessa. And you can see it pops up just below our cropping effect. You probably need to scroll to see it. And the color key enables me to use this selector tool, this small pipette here, and select a hue of green. You can see this hue changes here to whatever color I'm hovering over. And I just select the color of green. And nothing happens instantaneously, because when I have selected a color of green, I will have to begin to adjust the tolerance here, actually telling Premiere how much a difference to that color it should actually try to remove. And you can see whenever it becomes black now, it is actually transparent. But you can see as I try to remove more and more of the green screen, I also disintegrate Tessa more and more. So of course we could make a nice animation of this and make Tessa disintegrate, but she's such a lovely lady, so maybe not. The issue of this is that I have to stop at some place. I can also feather the edges, so make it more soft. I can thin it, try to remove some pixels so we don't have these green edges around her. But we still get the issue that we can only get so and so far with one color key. So actually I will need, if I wanted to continue to use this effect, I would need to drag another color key. So over here in the effects, I would have to drag yet another color key. Select one of the remaining lighter hues of green, and then start the process all over again. And again, I cannot remove all of it without beginning to remove Tessa. So you can see, with this, you can be very, very precise. We can do some very precise green screening if we want to use the time. If we want to, but often this will require us to add maybe 6 color keys to actually make a precise removal of the background. It is how to get the most precise result, but there is a way that is often faster, most of the time, especially when you have nice green screen areas like we do. So I go up here and I select our color keys and actually press backspace to delete them again. Because we'll try to see, can we apply this Ultra key instead? And this should be the go-to tool for you. If the Ultra key works, always stick to the Ultra key. So I drag the Ultra key effect on top of my video. And again, I try to find the selector tool here. And now I just select a color of green. It's like some kind of hue here. And you can see now instantaneously it begins to actually remove a lot. But you will also see that even though it has removed some, there is sort of some noise. It is not completely transparent. So we still need to adjust a little here. Sometimes it is enough by just here at the settings of the Ultra key, go from default to aggressive. You can see that removed a wee bit more. Sometimes it works just to take the selector tool and select another hue of green, say, okay, what if we actually took here? But still, if there still is a little bit of noise, you might see there is some noise up there in the corner in my video. Usually, this selection of Matty Generation, if you highlight that one, highlight that one, and begin to fiddle with either the highlights or the shadow. You can see here, when I begin to remove the shadow, we get a bit closer, and maybe if I then take something like that. So highlights can do some things. You can see that removes the floor, and the shadows kind of removes the rest. But again, the shadows can also choke some of the out of the image. So be mindful how to adjust the shadowing effects. And then try to figure out what is the best position here maybe. What is the best place to sort of place my keying here. And now I got something that looks rather nice. And you can of course fiddle around with this. But right now we have a more or less transparent background. And what we'll need to do actually now is to put in a background. But the problem is that my video layer 1 is actually the background. So what we'll do now is that you hold down the mouse button and you select the entire clip we've made up until now. Both the title and the green screen video. And we'll move that up to video layer 2 instead. Like this. So now we actually have a black background here. And luckily I have made a background file for us, which is actually another video file. I have made one called... what did I call it? Twitter search, nope. I called it Twitter face? Nope. Context background, of course. Naming conventions. So you can see there is a video file called context background. It's a nice little one where I've actually also already edited some video of a video advertisement for our Twitter app, which could be placed in the context of Tessa and her boyfriend, soon-to-be ex-boyfriend. So we can drag this context background, and we can drag that down into our video layer 1 now. Place that down here, and we can see now we actually have the background here, but we can see it's not at all placed in any way that makes sense. It is behind our actors, but it is not aligned correctly. So of course we could right-click on our background and choose Scale to Frame Size. See, okay, that takes us some of the way. That's nice. The problem, of course, here is that because that we cropped the green screen image, Klaus will suddenly emerge out of a portal from another dimension. And even though that's nice, that's maybe a bit too sci-fi for what we want. Oh, look, he's also from another dimension. It's aliens. So it's okay. We could, of course, crop our background, but we could also say, okay, we know actually where they end up. So we could also just select now our transparent green screen layer here. We could select layer 2 and go up in Effects Control and then actually just reposition the entire video. So now I'm gonna press this one called Motion. When I press this one, I can actually just begin to move them around as I please. So we might just move them over here, so we align where Tim is exiting with our black line over here. So now it just looks like but you can see what we did here. Now Klaus's head is actually being cut off. So I also need to make sure that they are aligned on top, like that. So something like that, or we could just reposition them to be larger. Many ways to do the same thing, or make them much smaller. Honey, I Shrunk the Children. So now we actually have a scene that works rather neatly. We have Tessa fading in. We have Klaus breaking up with her. What an asshole. Tim coming in. And then what we know also is that, that we want Tessa at this moment to point to our advertising. But right now, the advertising is behind Tessa, so we cannot really see what she's seeing. So again, since this is a sketch, we don't care about the aspect ratio of the video. So we'll just solve the problem in the fastest way we can think of. And that will be to select the background layer here, video layer 1, and again do the motion. Press the motion effect up in Effects Control, and we simply just move the background instead. Maybe we actually zoom a bit in on the background. Whoop. Something like that. And reposition that to be around here. And as you can see now, we actually need to move them a bit more again. So you can see, we need to sometimes fiddle a little around with this stuff to make it actually work. Now the best option here would probably be to resize the background a little and move it so it sort of fits. Oh man. I want to say to you that I made this to be hot on purpose, but yeah, something like that, probably. Or we could just crop the background. But again, now we get that there is something going on, and it's actually not that important to see what's there. It's just important to see that Tessa is actually doing some stuff here. And you can see the background layer is longer than our clip with Tessa. So of course we'll just go back down into the timeline and adjust the clip to be shorter. When the red arrow here appears, just adjust it to be the correct length. Something like that. Nicely. Okay, so they left. Tessa now becomes happy that she saw that she has some possibilities in her life. Great. So what we want to do here is we want to cut to a close-up. And I have a close-up of an iPhone in hand. It's actually a still photo with a transparent layer. You can see if I double-click it here. It's just an iPhone with a transparent hole in the middle. So what I want to do is that we want to try to position Tessa like she is trying to scan this scanner. So I know we're going to use our iPhone, so we can drag this iPhone in hand piece of graphic down here. And we can see, okay, now we have that. And we can adjust that. But we also want the background of the same context as we had here. So we're actually just going to take the context background once again and drag a new version of it down here. So now I actually have the same background. We can adjust that again. But what we want to do now is we want to adjust all of this to sort of fit like Tessa has her hand up around here in a perspective. So what we're going to do is that we're going to select the background layer and the video effects, and then we can just scale it up. And so now I scaled it up to 340%. And I could also maybe reposition it a bit so it was placed around somewhere along the lines of here. So now we more or less have that part of our movie where we want it. And I can do a lot of the same with my iPhone in hand JPEG, PNG file here. I can move it around. But right now we actually also want to rotate it a bit. We want it to be a bit more aligned like this. So I just select the rotation effect and just like that. And maybe we want it to be more or less like that. And maybe I also want to scale it a bit down. Scale it to something like this. So we could sort of have her move around to sort of scan this thing. But as you can see now, there's a lot of visual clutter. The background is very, very drawing too much attention to it. So we'll add another effect. We'll add some blur to our video. So the background sort of becomes blurred out in a bouquet. So we need some blurring effects. And again, we're going to add this to our sketching folder first because we know we're probably going to use this again. Gesundheit. So I can just, again, search for the effect that I know I need. I need a blur effect. And I can see there is a lot of different blur effects. The one we mostly will use is the Gaussian blur. So when I find the Gaussian blur, I just drag this down to my new folder here. Drag down the Gaussian blur. Sometimes we'll also use sharpen. So while we're at it, we can also drag this sharpen effect down here. So I just found by writing blur, finding Gaussian blur, adding it down here. And we're done. So now I have this Gaussian blur effect. And I will draw this onto our background. And you can see here then when I select the background layer, the effects controls, I can now control the blurriness of the background. So now we get the sense that the background is there, but we also get much more focus on our iPhone that we have in hand here. So that's rather nice. So this is actually where I think we should make our first piece of small keyframed animation. And we will only be having time to cover the basics of this. But what keyframed animation basically is that we tell Adobe Premiere through all of these stopwatches. You can see a lot of the effects we have a small stopwatch. Whenever the stopwatch is selected, we actually toggle animation. So if I select the iPhone layer down here below, I could tell that at the start of this clip, at the beginning of the iPhone in hand clip, then I will toggle the position. And you can see as soon as I pressed this and it became blue, something also happened over here. You see here if I select it again. Be mindful what happens over here. I select and instantaneously what's called a keyframe has been created. And a keyframe is essentially just that we tell Adobe Premiere that at this point in time in our timeline, I can zoom a bit in on it here. At this point of time in the timeline, we just tell Premiere that our graphics here, our iPhone, will have this position, this X and this Y position. Then if I move it a bit further into the timeline, you can see now the timeline has also moved here. If I then move my phone, you can see it begins to drag an arrow or a line here, and that actually animates. We tell Adobe that throughout this course of action, it should move this device accordingly. So of course I can begin to adjust the time. I can make this happen really, really slowly, or drag the keyframe closer and say, okay, this motion has to happen fast. So that's actually the basic of animation. We make sure that instead of us having to put in the graphics for every moment, we just ask Adobe Premiere to remember that in this point in time, it should be there. So maybe we add some more, saying, okay, at this moment in time, I want it to be here, but it actually needs to be a bit lower at this point. So you can see now my motion curve here is stretching down, and a bit later on I want it not to be there, I want it to be up there, and maybe over here I need it to have moved like this. You can see now every time I do this, it adds a keyframe, and it also shows me the path that the motion will take place in now. So now I get this sort of her trying to figure out where to move and to scan. And if I'm unhappy with the duration of this, if I thought this is actually going a bit too fast, all I have to do is to just tweak the length between these keyframes. Say, okay, there needs to be a bit more time for this to happen. She actually tries to be rather precise here. So I just drag these, and now it begins to be something like this. So again, it doesn't look completely realistic right now. We can fiddle a lot around with this later on if we want to. But for now, we wanted it to look like that she tries to sort of reposition it. And then she stands still, and when it then stands still, I think we want it to pop up that she is beginning to scan this this poster and then have a profile. So what we're going to do here is that we're actually going to drag our iPhone in hand layer up in video layer 3 now, because we want to add a middle ground now. So we're going to drag this one up in layer 3 like that. And then over here in our assets, I think we have something called a twinterface. And this is actually, again, me. I've made this small animation of a Bluetooth icon sort of buzzing. You could actually just find a GIF and do the same thing. But now we're going to add this one down here in video layer 3. And you can see now it suddenly will come there. And we're going to use the same things that we did before, saying, okay, let's reposition it first of all. You see now it will be in the background here. Let's try to figure out how to make it fit. And lo and behold, as you can see, it doesn't actually fit the phone that I chose. So of course I could go back to the drawing board, but I could also just say, okay, maybe we don't have to have what's called a uniform scaling. Maybe I should just deselect here and then stretch it to be a bit longer. Because again, it is just a sketch, it doesn't need to look perfect. So I just deselected this uniform scaling so I could actually make it look like I want to. So now we want to have it so that when our animation here is done, when she's there, we actually want this one to be placed there. So we have something like, whoops. And of course we can have it sort of fade in if we wanted that. And remember, we have our cross dissolve from before. We might just drag a cross dissolve then on top of the beginning of the twinterface clip. And now it nicely sort of fades in. And it begins to scan. And it scans for a while. And maybe we actually just want now to be sure to have a short clip where we show that she has now made a profile. We have an image file here called Twitter profile created. And now I've renamed Tessa to Anne so that she won't turn up all over the internet when we upload this one as Tessa, but instead as Anne. But again, I can take this roughly made clip here and we can throw this in again to our timeline. And maybe we want to fade from these two, so we'll place this in the same middle ground here. So have that extend to the rest of our clip. And do the same procedure as before. Just select the clip and resizes to something that is okay for what we actually want to achieve. So, and maybe we again just add a cross dissolve to sort of show that it fades over. Something like that. And then we can extend this clip. There we actually have it. Now we have from being broken up with, having green screen, having done this, and twing, we get our profile. But of course, a lot of this becomes much more nice when we get audio. So before diving into the very last part that we can manage to actually do now with the stop motion, let's quickly add some sound here. I've made a video file or an audio file called Twitter Speakers where I used my limited acting skills to actually just make some nonsense sentence for what they are saying. So you can see here, we have something here. Yes. So let's see what, again, we can use the same tools as before with audio, say mark in and mark out. And then drag down the audio into our beginning of our clip here. So now you can see and then maybe when she does this, click off a button. Then we could, in the cut here between, I also have a clicking sound. So maybe just to emphasize that she's clicking, we could draw this click sound down here to sort of show that when like that. And then maybe when this scanner begins, we could draw down this radar sound. Radar detector. Let's just draw this down to sort of empathize what she's doing. And then maybe here in the transition, we could add this magic sound for the profile being created. So we have something like that. And then that's actually what we need. Maybe we then just adjust the clip. We can adjust the length of the clip and all of that jazz if we want to. But now we actually show what we want to show. So we're going to make a title now showing that this is a week later. Then she actually goes on a date. There are multiple ways of using titles in Adobe Premiere. One of the easiest ways is going up in File and New and just use the old way of doing things with the legacy titles, because that's the one requiring the fewest amounts of resources on your computer. So up in File, New, Legacy Title, just give it a name, a week later. And here you will have very basic text editing and graphics controls. You can also make graphical elements if you wanted that. But for now, we want to make a text box here. And you can select some pre-made stuff here or adjust the hell out of it here. And we'll just write up here, a week later. And maybe I'm going to make the size of this a bit bigger. Up here you have the sizing. And when I've made something that I'm happy with, I just close the window. There's no OK button. You just close the window. So I've made some text. And now you can see I have a new file over here called A Week Later. So I'm actually just going to add this in my video here. And maybe I leave a small amount of time here in the timeline so it goes black for a moment before going with this one. And of course I can end my video here by adding a dip to black, for example. And I need to add the dip to black to all the layers. All 3 layers need the same dip to black effect. So it will now fade into black. And we can add the dip to black in the beginning of the next clip, so it will also fade in. So now we'll do the last part where we need to do some stop motion animation. And as you can see, there is a folder here called Images for Stop Motion. And if you expand that one, are there no images in the folder? Did I forget to upload? No, they are. It should be there. Apparently this one is just empty. Oh well. Well, if we had that, if we had the images of the stop motion, you would see that I have 105 stop motion images made in the stand scans. And they portray this interaction that we want to make. But it would be tedious for us to drag them all into the timeline one after another. What we can do instead is that we can select the first one. We can only do this if you make sure that the numbering is 1, 2, 3 or A, B, C, but you cannot use hyphens or underscores or dots or anything like that. You have to have only alphabetic or numerical naming. So you have to rename all your files if you have taken them on an iPhone or an Android phone. But when done that, we can click this Option key and select Image Sequence here. And when we do that, we just need to select one image here and press Import. And what Premiere then does is that it creates now one entire video file with all our 105 images. But as you can see right now, it's really, really fast. Because right now it's playing with 25 frames per second. So it's playing with regular video speed, amounting to only 4 seconds of video in what I've created here. So before we put it into our timeline, we will need to adjust the frame rate. And we do that by selecting the clip over here, go up in Clip up in the top menu, where we have the option of Modify. And here we can ask Premiere to interpret the footage. So in Clip and Modify and Interpret Footage. And here we can ask it to then assume a specific frame rate. And you can see below here, right now it is only it will be 1 minute and 40 seconds if I assume it to 1 frames per second. And we can see that before it was 4 seconds long with 25 frames. So maybe we will go somewhere along the lines of 5 frames per second, 20 seconds long. And we can press OK, and we can try to play our video again. This is better. If we wanted to go faster or slower, we could of course just go in and adjust the length there. Okay, and now we want maybe we actually want to start out by just having up until the moment that Anne has actually arrived. Just up until this point in time. When she arrives here, we make our mark out now. Drag this video down. And you can see these images are lower in resolution than the rest of the video. So we remember what we've been doing a couple of times by now. We can just right-click on the image, on the video, and we can scale it to frame size, like that. And now we will need to do all the same stuff we did before. We will need to crop the image. So nice and behold that we have this shortcut to that effect. But it's the same procedure. You don't have to basically follow along here because it is the same thing we did before. We just need to remove all those nasty edges here from the stand scan. Something like that. Okay, that works. And we also want to remove the background, so I use an Alt key and see, okay, whoopity-dip, like that. Maybe I do it aggressively. Make sure it removes the rest of it. Something like that. And same procedure again. I have a nice little image here of Nørreport station in Copenhagen. Let's say that's where the date is. I just drag that down into the background. And lo and behold, now every piece of the action takes place on Nørreport. And of course I can adjust the size of this frame if I want to. And in the same way, if we think it's too disturbing to have it in full colors here, we can just take the Gaussian blur, blur it a little out, so we still have a little context, but still have this interaction in focus. And you can see, okay, I need to adjust my clip, like we did before, move it down here, and there we have it. Now, if I then want later on this specific clip to be a bit shorter or a bit longer, there is another neat little feature. When you right-click a stop-motion clip or any video clip, we could do that. We could make slow motion in normal video too. All video clips has the option of you guys right-clicking on it and choosing speed and duration. And then you can add it to be 150%, then it will be faster, or just 50% and it will be slower. Just be sure when you do this to select Ripple Edit. When you select Ripple Edit, you make sure that it pushes or stretches the timeline in front or behind it. If you don't select this one, you will overwrite the timeline instead. But you can see when we do this, then suddenly it becomes slower. It was a bit too slow maybe, so let's just keep this at the speed we selected. But it's important to remember. But just before we end here, let's see a small clip here, what we can do when we begin to think creatively about what we do with our video layers on our video. Because I want actually Anne here to scan for finding her true love. And luckily I have this little video called Twinder Search, where I actually just recorded me turning my smartphone around and trying to figure out who is my date. Of course that's the date, and he hasn't seen her yet. So I could put this one down here, and I'm gonna put it in the middle ground, because I could actually just now make a copy. I could hold the Alt button on my keyboard and then just drag my iPhone animation from before. I forgot to hold my Alt button like that. Now I've made a copy of this specific phone with this specific effect. So now we have all of these subtle animations and stuff like that. And the only thing we need to do is then to make sure that we scale this to frame size and that she ends up having Søren in focus. So we can maybe do something like this, maybe zoom in a bit. Make sure that he is in focus in the end. So now we have this nice little video of, okay, scanning, 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 scanning. Oh, wait a minute, there he is. And now you can see the background is actually not long enough. So here comes another little neat effect. We can freeze frame a video or anything. So if I wanted to say, okay, this moment should last a bit longer because we need to add some effects, I can use the razor tool, and it's found in this small menu where you also have the selector button. At my computer it's here, some computers it will be there. It's the one called, up here in Windows, called Tools, when you have to find it. The razor tool lets you cut your videos. So you can essentially cut a video in the timeline into 2 pieces. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in on my clip here and below and use the razor to just cut out a wee bit of the last part of this video. And then I can, if it works, right click on this video file here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the audio, because we cannot freeze frame if there's audio. So I just need to right click and unlink up here, because now I can then select the audio layer independently. So I right clicked and unlinked the video, and then I can delete it. Now I can right click on this small clip with CERN again, and I can choose to add a frame hold. That's essentially, we make a frozen time. Now when I've done that, whoops, why couldn't I do that? Okay. And sometimes you need to actually also select frame hold option and make sure it holds it in the time code that you selected. And sometimes it still doesn't work. Maybe it's actually because I haven't cut it too short. It needs to be actually only one small frame here, and you can see it's not the easiest thing to make to work, but sometimes you will need to do it like that. And it still doesn't work. Always happens when you do the sequence timecode. I actually think that's a problem. You need to select sequence timecode instead of source timecode. Yes. Yes, it works. You can see what we did now. Now we actually just have a still image of CERN, and we can extend that for as long a period of time as we want. And you can see the effectiveness of this, that we can now make a freeze frame in the middle of a video if we want to point out some details in our sketch, right? But what we want to do as the last thing here is that as soon as it makes the freeze frame, we're actually going to do something very evil to CERN, because I still need my vengeance. First thing is I'm going to add this radar sound that we had before. I'm going to add this down here, so we sort of around here. Maybe we want to extend it a bit. Around here. Maybe it should be around. So it ends there. I'm going to cut the clip. So here. And we're going to freeze frame around there. So now we have a scanner. And luckily, I have a Twinder match here with Honky Donk 77 and saying that he is located. So of course we're going to add that into our background layer here. You can see here actually that needs to be in the middle. You see this one has to be brought all the way back to the background. So we can have our interface here in the middle, just like we did before. We can now take our nice Twinder match with Honky Donk and maybe just add the magic sound here and maybe have him cross dissolve into being. and maybe have it something closer here. Nice. And then I can just extend the clips to say, okay, we ended here. We only needed the freeze frame for a couple of seconds. And then I can go back to our stop motion video. And I actually want to play the last part of our video now. So I make a new mark in where the other ended. And then we just want to play this story to the end. So I take the last part of our stop motion video, drag it down here, and now because I have some effects that I know works over here, I can go into effects control of the previous stop motion clip, and I can just select the cropping effect, and I can copy that specific configuration. I just scale to frame size here, and I can just right click and paste that one. I can do the same for the Alt key. Copy and paste it in over here. So you can see the workflow becomes much faster. You can also make a copy of this specific piece of Nørreport Station, holding down the Alt button, something like that. So now we have our scanning. And you can see we needed to add some transition effects to make it all work. But now they're holding hands. Whoops. And maybe the last thing we wanted to do was to, again, maybe we wanted to freeze frame this for a moment. So we could have it the moment last just a wee bit longer. Frame hold option, sequence timecode. Extend this for a wee bit time, and maybe just to end the story on a happy note, add a little heart on top of it all, and remember that we can animate stuff, so we could animate both the position and the scaling, and said at this point in time the heart is not visible, but a little later in the timeline, the heart has suddenly scaled up. Maybe it's also moved a bit up here, and maybe later on it pumps down again, pumps up again, maybe it moves a bit more, something like that, pumps down, and then ends up being like that. So we end up having something like this. Whee! And they lived happily ever after. And of course, we could also add some music to this. There's a music track. We just throw this into the 1 week later mark here. And we could destemp that. And now we actually have a finished movie. Let's try to see if we can render it as something that looks rather okay without. Of course, we could have added a scanner noise here. We forgot to do that, actually. We could have used the same radar effect rather nicely. But instead we use it with Anne. and see that I actually added hair to Søren's head here. And all we needed to do now was to make an end titles. And end titles, we could have made a title called The End and all of that jazz. But I guess we get the basic of it. And even though I know it was a bit hard to follow along sometimes, I'm gonna save now this screen recording of me doing this, and we're gonna put it up on YouTube, and then you can follow along this one too. And besides that, remember that we have these smaller ones. If you one of the days say, okay, how was it that he used stop motion? How was it that he did keyframe animations or green screening, or at all used Premiere to set it up? Then use these smaller ones if you want to dive more into it. Okay? Now, the